The dimensional rift collapsed behind Frieza with the sound of tearing silk, leaving him suspended in absolute vacuum. Stars burned in configurations he did not recognize. No familiar constellations marked the void. No divine presences hummed through the cosmic background. The absence registered immediately, no Beerus drowsing on some distant world, no angels cataloging mortal affairs, no supreme Kais fretting over balance. This universe operated without the infrastructure of gods he had always taken for granted. His tail coiled slowly as crimson eyes swept across the unfamiliar dark. The silence felt different here, heavier somehow, as if reality itself held its breath. Frieza extended his senses outward in expanding waves, letting Ki probe the fabric of local space. The energy moved normally, responding to his will without resistance, but what returned carried strange flavors. Power existed in this cosmos, certainly, yet it tasted fundamentally altered. Cosmic radiation hummed with purpose rather than chaos. Residual energies clung to certain regions like territorial markers left by creatures who understood dominance. Most curious were traces of something almost divine, yet filtered through entirely different metaphysical rules. Not Kai. Not exactly. Something else wearing divinity's shape without its substance. Frieza flexed his fingers and watched violet sparks crackle between them. At least the fundamentals remained constant. Physics would bend to power here just as it did at home. A universe without gods meant a universe without consequences, and that suited him perfectly. 3 million miles distant hung a rocky planet slightly larger than Earth, its surface scarred by ancient impacts and mineral deposits. No atmosphere softened its dead continents. No life had ever walked those barren plains. Perfect for calibration. He crossed the distance in seconds, space warping around his trajectory as velocity mounted. Stars stretched into lines of light. His approach generated no sonic boom, no atmospheric compression, only silent passage through void. When he stopped 40 feet above the surface, the sudden deceleration sent ripples through local space dust. Frieza raised one hand and began gathering energy. Ki compressed into a sphere no larger than a marble purple light, pulsing as more power funneled into the construct. The concentration process felt identical to home, the same mental geometry required to shape destruction. He built layer upon layer until the death ball swelled to basketball size, its surface roiling with barely contained force. He flicked it downward with casual precision. The sphere punched through planetary crust without resistance, burrowing toward the core in microseconds. 3 heartbeats of silence followed. Then the world shuddered. Cracks radiated from the impact point, racing across continents faster than sound. Deep below, the core destabilized as the death ball detonated at the gravitational center. Pressure built with nowhere to escape. The planet broke apart in slow motion from his perspective. Continental plates peeled away from the mantle in massive sections. Molten lava fountained from exposed fissures before freezing instantly into grotesque sculptures. Debris scattered in all directions, fragments ranging from mountains to dust spreading across new orbital patterns. The destruction bloomed silently, a sphere of expanding chaos that would drift for millennia. Frieza watched with clinical interest. Ki functioned here without impediment, following rules he understood. No protective barriers existed at the cosmic level. No divine interference to prevent casual obliteration. This reality accepted violence without comment, unlike home, where destroying planets inevitably attracted attention from supreme Kais, or angels documenting mortal affairs. He turned toward another world, 5 million miles distant. This one showed traces of primitive life, single-celled organisms, clinging to existence in thermal vents or shallow seas. Nothing that mattered. This time he simply pointed one finger. The beam crossed interplanetary space, in an eye blink, a lance of purple energy carrying enough force to shatter continents. It struck the northern pole and drilled straight through, emerging from the southern hemisphere in a spray of superheated plasma. The planet split along its rotational axis, cleaving into unequal hemispheres that tumbled apart. Oceans vaporized into steam. The biosphere ceased to exist before Frieza lowered his hand. 2 worlds destroyed in 10 minutes with negligible effort. The conclusion formed with crystalline clarity: this universe was remarkably fragile. His senses stretched outward again, probing deeper into local space. Unusual signatures pinged his awareness from multiple directions. Advanced technology clustered several star systems away. Massive gravitational anomalies bent light in impossible configurations. Most intriguing were faint resonances of organized intelligence. Vast communication networks spanning dozens of solar systems. Civilizations, then. Empires with faster-than-light travel energy weapons, perhaps rudimentary understanding of cosmic forces. All of which made them potential assets or obstacles, depending on their response to his existence. Frieza adjusted course toward the nearest concentration of technological activity. His approach generated no signals, left no trail that primitive sensors could detect. To any civilization monitoring local space, he would register as background radiation, a quantum fluctuation safely ignored. Only when he chose revelation would they understand their error. Hours passed as he navigated through void stars, crawling past, while his trajectory threaded between asteroid fields. When he finally decelerated near a populated star system, curiosity stirred. Space stations orbited a yellow sun in geometric patterns. Massive vessels moved between planets on apparent trade routes. On the 4th world from the sun, cities covered 3 major landmasses, their lights visible across millions of miles. The inhabitants had achieved competence, at least. Stability, organization, technological sophistication suggesting centuries of development. They even maintained a defense fleet around their homeworld, though the vessels appeared designed for asteroids or pirates rather than serious threats. Frieza considered options with the detachment of selecting which finger to use. Overwhelming force would reduce their primary world to dust, claiming whatever resources remained. Or he could observe further gathering intelligence about political structures before making strategic decisions. The second approach required patience, but potentially yielded better results. His tail twitched. Patience. When Eddie needed patience, power always provided more direct solutions. Yet circumstances had changed. This was not Universe 7, where reputation preceded him and entire sectors fled at rumors of his approach. Here he possessed no history, no legend, no accumulated weight of terror. Here he was simply another being in an incomprehensibly vast cosmos. The thought should have been humbling. Instead, Frieza found it liberating. Without legacy to constrain him, he could rebuild from foundational principles. An empire required subjects' fear efficiency and absolute certainty that resistance meant extinction. These aliens could provide the foundation if properly motivated. He descended through orbital infrastructure toward the 4th planet. Automated systems pinged his position with targeting locks. He ignored them. Their energy output would barely warm his skin. The atmosphere embraced him with standard nitrogen-oxygen composition. He dropped through cloud layers into night city lights, sprawling beneath in patterns that spoke of centralized authority. His landing destroyed uninhabited grassland outside the nearest metropolis. The impact cratered ground for 200 feet in all directions, flash vaporizing moisture and sending up superheated steam. Seismic sensors would register the event as a meteor strike, which suited his purposes. He stood perfectly still and waited. 20 minutes later, flying vehicles circled the site while ground forces established a perimeter. Soldiers in environmental suits moved with professional discipline, uncertainty visible in their body language, despite training. They had protocols for meteor strikes, not for what they actually witnessed. One soldier approached with a scanning device. Equipment readings would show nothing Frieza knew. His suppressed Chi registered as ambient temperature to technology. He appeared as unusually dense debris, nothing more. The soldier descended into the crater. 20 feet away. 15. 10. Frieza raised his head and opened his eyes. The soldier froze. The scanner clattered against stone. Behind the faceplate, eyes widened with sudden understanding that power dynamics had shifted fundamentally. "Tell your superiors," Frieza said, voice carrying easily through thin atmosphere, "that this world now belongs to me." The soldier stood paralyzed for 3 seconds before survival instinct overrode shock. The being turned and ran scrambling up the crater slope with desperate speed. Frieza watched the retreat with mild amusement. Fear spread faster than any communication technology. By morning, everyone would know something had arrived. And that would be only the beginning. The soldier's report triggered cascades of disbelief through command hierarchies. Initial responses focused on containment protocols, quarantine procedures, psychological evaluation of the witness. Standard bureaucratic reflexes when confronted with data that violated comfortable assumptions. Within 6 hours, those reflexes dissolved into panic. Frieza had left the 4th planet by then, his trajectory carrying him deeper into the region's populated sectors. The aliens called this space the Shi'ar Frontier, though such designations meant nothing to him. What mattered was density. Clusters of inhabited worlds represented opportunities for demonstration, and demonstrations established parameters that words alone could never communicate. The first target manifested as a mining colony orbiting a gas giant. 17,000 workers extracted rare metals from the giant's rings using automated platforms and atmospheric processors. Their operation had functioned for decades, with mechanical efficiency feeding raw materials into the broader economic infrastructure. Frieza studied the setup for perhaps 30 seconds before compressing Ki into his palm. The energy sphere glowed white-hot this time, rather than purple, a minor variation in wavelength that changed nothing about its function. He released it toward the gas giant's upper atmosphere. The death ball penetrated layers of hydrogen and helium, boring through pressure zones that would crush starship hulls like paper, descending until it reached the metallic hydrogen core where physics bent under its own weight. Detonation came without warning. The gas giant convulsed as its core ignited in a fusion reaction never meant to occur naturally. Atmospheric layers compressed and rebounded, creating a shockwave that radiated outward at supersonic speeds. Mining platforms vaporized, first their crews experiencing death too quickly for nervous systems to register pain. The rings shattered next, countless fragments of ice and rock scattering across new trajectories. 3 moons orbiting in close proximity cracked from tidal stress before the expanding plasma envelope consumed them entirely. Frieza watched the spectacle for 90 seconds before moving on. The gas giant would burn for years, a stellar pyre visible across dozens of light years. Let it serve as a beacon. 2 hours later, an agricultural world hosting 8 million colonists learned what it meant to attract his attention. Frieza didn't bother landing this time. From high orbit, he extended both hands and unleashed a barrage of energy beams that stitched across continental surfaces in geometric patterns. Each beam carried enough force to trigger volcanic eruptions, where they struck cracking tectonic plates and releasing centuries of stored geothermal pressure. The planet's biosphere ignited in synchronized conflagrations that merged into a single atmospheric firestorm. Orbital sensors registered surface temperatures climbing past 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit before the monitoring stations themselves succumbed to the heat. The pattern continued across 6 more worlds in rapid succession. Some died to focused attacks that exploited geological weaknesses. Others simply ceased to exist when Frieza decided efficiency mattered more than creativity. A space station hosting 500,000 civilians became expanding debris when he flew through it without slowing his Kai-reinforced body shearing through structural supports like they were cobwebs. An entire moon disappeared when he tested the upper limits of a sustained energy beam. Curious whether prolonged output could overcome gravitational binding in a different manner than explosive force. It could. Emergency broadcasts flooded subspace channels across the frontier. Distress signals overlapped in desperate cacophony, each transmission adding fragments to an incomplete picture of systematic annihilation. Fleet commanders scrambled to organize responses, even as they struggled to comprehend the tactical data. Witnesses described impossibly fast movement energy attacks that ignored defensive countermeasures, a single entity treating interplanetary distances like trivial obstacles. The Nova Corps received priority alerts from 3 different empires simultaneously. Shi'ar High Command activated war protocols not used since the last Kree conflict. Even the Skrulls, paranoid by cultural tradition, recognized a threat that transcended political boundaries. Something had entered the cosmos, and it was methodically erasing inhabited space, without demands, negotiations, or apparent motive beyond destruction itself. On the blue area of Earth's moon, Uatu, the Watcher stood motionless before observation equipment that had monitored cosmic events for millennia. His instruments tracked the energy signature as it moved between systems, leaving dead worlds in its wake like grotesque breadcrumbs. The signature registered as nothing in his extensive databases. Not cosmic entity, not celestial experiment, not dimensional interloper from any cataloged reality within the Marvel multiverse. Something else entirely had found its way here, and it operated on principles Uatu recognized from civilizations that measured power in planets destroyed rather than battles won. He had witnessed such beings before, though never one that burned quite this brightly, or moved with such absolute confidence through space that should have been protected by the abstract entities maintaining universal order. Yet no intervention came. Eternity, still recovering from the strain of universal reconstruction after Secret Wars, did not stir. The living tribunal observed, but did not judge. Even the Celestials, who typically responded to disruptions in cosmic balance, remained absent from the unfolding catastrophe. The universe's immune system, weakened by recent trauma, failed to recognize the infection spreading through its outer reaches. Frieza felt their absence like a sailor feels favorable winds. Each world that died without consequence confirmed his initial assessment. This reality possessed no mechanism to punish power wielded without restraint. The strong truly did as they pleased, here provided their strength reached sufficient magnitude. And his strength, even constrained to this baseline form, exceeded anything these civilizations could muster. He paused above the wreckage of what had been a thriving trade hub 40 minutes earlier. Debris fields stretched for hundreds of miles in all directions, cooling metal and frozen atmosphere drifting in silence. Somewhere in that expanding cloud were the remains of 18 million beings who had woken that morning with no concept that their existence would end before sunset. The thought stirred nothing in him, Sentiment had been burned out of his psychology long ago, if it had ever existed at all. These deaths served a function beyond personal satisfaction. They established a new constant in this universe's mathematics: opposition equaled extinction. The lesson would propagate through survivor testimony and recovered sensor data, spreading fear more efficiently than his physical presence ever could. His tail twitched with something approaching contentment. The White Nova campaign, as terrified civilizations would eventually name it, had achieved its primary objective. Everyone who mattered now understood that something unprecedented had arrived, something that treated inhabited space as territory to be claimed rather than respected, and they still had no idea what he actually looked like when trying. Frieza adjusted his trajectory toward a new heading this time, with a specific destination in mind. His Kai senses had detected something unusual during the recent destruction, a silver flicker of energy responding to the chaos he created. Not fleeing, not attacking, simply observing from a distance with the patience of a being that had watched countless civilizations rise and fall. Someone had noticed him and chosen surveillance over immediate confrontation. Interesting. Most entities with that much cosmic awareness would have intervened by now, either to stop him or test his strength. This observer possessed discipline, which suggested intelligence, which meant a conversation might prove more valuable than another corpse. Frieza smiled without warmth and accelerated toward the energy signature. Let whoever was watching get a clearer view. He had questions about this universe's power structures, and observation worked both directions. The hunt had officially begun. The silver figure emerged from the asteroid field like a ghost materializing from fog. His board cut through vacuum without propulsion trails or energy signatures, moving on principles that transcended conventional physics. The being stood perfectly balanced atop the reflective surface, humanoid in shape but radiating power that bent light around his chrome form. To ordinary sensors, he would have appeared as a moving star. To Frieza's key sense, he registered as something far more interesting. The entity stopped 300 yards away, suspended in the debris field that Frieza had been observing. This region designated Yakal Rift by local civilizations, stretched for millions of miles in a band of shattered moons and planetary fragments. Ancient collisions had created a graveyard of rock and ice that drifted in lazy orbits around nothing in particular. A fitting arena for what was about to occur. Frieza tilted his head, examining the newcomer with the same clinical interest he might apply to an unusual insect. The silver coating wasn't armor or technology. It had been woven into the being's cellular structure, bonded at a level that suggested cosmic scale manipulation. Beneath that reflective surface power, churned in patterns unlike anything from Universe 7. Not ki, not divine energy, something that existed at the intersection of matter and fundamental force, as if the universe itself had been convinced to serve this individual's will. You have destroyed 17 worlds in the past 6 hours. The voice carried across vacuum through means that had nothing to do with sound waves. It resonated directly in the space between thought and perception, translated automatically into concepts Frieza understood. I am Norin Rad, Herald of Galactus. This sector falls under protection protocols established after the last cosmic upheaval. Your actions constitute a violation of universal law. Frieza's tail swished once, a gesture of mild amusement. Universal law. As if law had ever constrained power of sufficient magnitude. How fascinating. This reality does have authorities after all. Tell me, Herald of Galactus, what happens when someone violates your precious protocols. The silver being's expression remained neutral, though something shifted in the energy field surrounding him. Typically, I am sent to negotiate, to offer alternatives to violence. But the nature of your destruction suggests negotiation would be ineffective. You eliminate civilizations without consuming their resources, without territorial expansion, without any rational objective. You destroy because you can. An accurate assessment. Frieza raised one hand palm up and let violet energy crackle between his fingers. I appreciate competence even from those who oppose me. So I will give you precisely 3 seconds to leave. Consider it professional courtesy from one servant of cosmic entities to another. Power cosmic flared around the herald like silver fire. The board beneath his feet dissolved into liquid metal that flowed up his legs, merging with his body until his form blazed with coherent energy. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of stars. I cannot permit you to continue. How unfortunate. The herald moved first, crossing 300 yards in a fraction of a heartbeat. His fist, wreathed in power cosmic, drove toward Frieza's face with force calibrated to shatter adamantium. The punch connected with Frieza's raised palm, and the resulting shockwave shattered a dozen nearby asteroids into powder. Fragments the size of buildings tumbled away from the impact point, their trajectories altered by the raw, kinetic discharge. Frieza held the herald's fist without strain, examining the energy coating it with genuine curiosity. Up close, power cosmic revealed itself as something remarkable. It didn't just enhance physical attributes. It altered the fundamental constants governing how matter interacted with force. This being's punch carried energy that should have required a small star's output, yet came from a humanoid frame barely 6 feet tall. Impressive efficiency. The herald pulled back and unleashed a barrage that blurred into invisibility. Each strike came from a different angle as he circled Frieza at velocities approaching light speed, the accumulated kinetic energy building with each rotation. Frieza deflected the assault with minimal movement, his tail batting away strikes from behind while his hands guided the frontal attacks into empty space. The herald's speed was exceptional by any standard, but compared to fighters who could perceive microseconds as distinct units of time, it remained comprehensible. After perhaps 200 exchanges, Frieza caught both of the herald's wrists and held them steady. Your technique is adequate, but you're not actually trying to kill me, are you? Every strike pulls back at the last instant. You're testing my capabilities while minimizing collateral damage to the surrounding debris field. He smiled without warmth. Admirable restraint. Completely wasted. Power cosmic surged through the herald's body in a brilliant cascade. The energy didn't flow around Frieza, but through him, attempting to disrupt his molecular structure from within. It was an elegant attack, one that bypassed conventional durability by targeting atomic bonds directly. Against most opponents, it would have been instantly fatal. Frieza felt the energy attempting to unmake him and found the sensation mildly uncomfortable, like static electricity on skin. His ki responded automatically, creating a barrier at the cellular level that prevented the power cosmic from penetrating deeper than surface tissue. The two energies clashed in microscopic warfare across his body, neither gaining clear advantage. Interesting. This universe's power system could interact with ki after all, though not in ways that threatened him seriously. He released the herald and drifted backward 20 yards. You possess remarkable ability. Under different circumstances, I might have recruited you. But I've learned that servants bound by conscience make poor subordinates. Frieza's aura flared purple-white as he allowed more ki to circulate through his body. Let me show you what happens when restraint is removed. The herald raised both hands and unleashed a concentrated beam of power cosmic that could have evaporated a continent. Frieza pointed one finger and met it with a death beam no wider than a pencil. The two energies collided midway between them, and for a moment they struggled in apparent equilibrium. Then Frieza's beam began advancing meter by meter, pushing through the cosmic energy like a drill through soft clay. The herald's eyes widened fractionally. He diverted more power into the beam, drawing on reserves that had been held back for emergencies. The death beam's advance slowed, but didn't stop. Frieza watched the struggle with clinical detachment, measuring exactly how much output was required to overcome power cosmic at its current intensity. Useful data for future encounters. When the death beam reached within 10 yards of the herald, Frieza allowed it to dissipate. No need to conclude this prematurely. He accelerated forward, closing the distance, while the herald was still recovering from the energy expenditure. His kick caught the silver being in the ribs and sent him tumbling through 3 asteroids. Each impact cratering the rock before momentum carried him through to the next. The herald stabilized himself and reformed the board beneath his feet. Power cosmic blazed brighter now, no longer constrained by measured response. He streaked toward Frieza in a silver arc, trailing cosmic energy that carved through space debris like a blade. They collided again this time, trading blows at speeds that turned the asteroid field into a strobe-lit battlefield. Each exchange released enough energy to vaporize the surrounding rock, creating an expanding sphere of superheated plasma and dust. Frieza found himself genuinely engaged for the first time since arriving in this universe. The herald's power output had climbed significantly, approaching levels that would have troubled lesser opponents. His technique showed centuries of refinement, every movement economical and precisely targeted. More importantly, he was adapting. Each sequence of attacks incorporated adjustments based on Frieza's previous responses, suggesting tactical intelligence backing the cosmic might. But adaptation required time to develop patterns, and Frieza had no intention of providing sufficient data points. He caught the herald's next punch and drove his knee into the silver abdomen with enough force to double the being over. Before the herald could recover, Frieza's tail wrapped around his throat and slammed him into a nearby asteroid with enough impact to crack the rock's core. "You're forcing me to escalate," the herald managed, his voice strained. "I had hoped to avoid this." Frieza released him and drifted back, genuinely curious. "By all means, escalate. Show me what reserves you've been holding back." Power cosmic erupted from the herald in a sphere of silver light that consumed everything within 1,000 yards. The energy didn't explode outward so much as convert the surrounding space into pure cosmic force. Asteroids dissolved into constituent atoms. The vacuum itself seemed to burn with cold fire. When the light faded, the herald floated at the center of a perfectly spherical void, his body blazing with power that made his previous output seem like candlelight compared to a sun. Frieza studied the transformation with approval. "Much better. You were holding back far more than I anticipated." He flexed his fingers, feeling Ki respond to his will. "Which means I can justify using this." Golden light erupted from his body as transformation overtook him. His white and purple form shifted to gold and purple energy output, multiplying by orders of magnitude in the span of a heartbeat. The change wasn't dramatic in appearance, merely an alteration in color scheme. But the power differential was anything but subtle. Ki density increased until the space around Frieza warped visibly, his presence pressing against reality like a weight that physics struggled to accommodate. The herald's expression shifted to something approaching concern. His cosmic senses calibrated to measure power across galaxies, registered the new output, and found the numbers incomprehensible. This being had been holding back even more than he had, and the gap between their respective reserves was not shrinking despite his escalation. Frieza moved and the asteroid field ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. His velocity exceeded anything he'd demonstrated before crossing the distance to the herald faster than power cosmic could track. The punch that followed carried ki compressed to unprecedented density, and when it connected with the herald's hastily raised guard, the impact released energy equivalent to a stellar core collapse. The herald flew backward, tumbling through space for hundreds of miles before managing to arrest his momentum. His silver coating showed stress fractures where the blow had landed, cracks spreading across his forearms like broken glass. Pain registered for the first time, sharp and undeniable. He'd been struck by Galactus before during training sessions, meant to test his limits. This felt worse. Frieza appeared beside him without crossing the intervening distance, simply materializing, as if space had folded to accommodate his convenience. His speed in golden form operated on principles that made conventional movement obsolete. "The problem with cosmic powers," he said conversationally, "is that they rely on universal constants. Laws of physics, fundamental forces, the infrastructure of reality itself. My energy doesn't ask permission from the universe. It simply is, and reality adjusts accordingly." He struck again, a rapid combination that drove the herald through the remnants of the asteroid field like a pinball through bumpers. Each blow released precisely measured force, not enough to kill, but sufficient to inflict cumulative damage that would build toward incapacitation. The herald tried to counter, unleashing waves of power cosmic that could have sterilized solar systems. Frieza deflected them with casual backhand strikes, his golden aura shredding the cosmic energy into harmless radiation. After 30 seconds of one-sided combat, Frieza caught the herald by the throat and held him steady. The silver being struggled power flaring in desperate surges. But the grip might as well have been carved from neutron star matter for all the give it showed. Frieza studied his opponent's face, noting the fear beginning to eclipse determination in those featureless eyes. "You're not going to kill me." The herald managed, though the words came with difficulty. "Galactus would come for you. The abstracts would take notice. Killing a herald sends ripples across reality itself." "True," Frieza acknowledged. "Which is why you're going to survive this encounter and deliver a message for me." He released the herald and watched him float backward, body ravaged but still functional. "Tell your master and his peers that a new power has entered this cosmos. Tell them I claim territories as I see fit, and their laws hold no authority over me. Tell them that anyone who objects to this arrangement should come speak with me personally." He turned away, dismissing the herald from consideration. "Oh, and mentioned that I find your power cosmic fascinating. I may want to study it further once I've established proper infrastructure. Do try to heal before we meet again. I prefer my test subjects functional." Golden energy flared once more as Frieza accelerated away from the battlefield, leaving the Silver Surfer floating amid the wreckage of what had been the Yakal Rift. Behind him, the herald remained motionless for several minutes, processing defeat and the implications of what he'd just encountered. Eventually, Norin Rad reformed his board and began the long journey back to report what he'd learned. Galactus would need to know that something unprecedented had arrived in Universe 616. Something that treated cosmic powers as curiosities rather than threats. And somewhere in the depths of space, Frieza smiled and continued his trajectory toward more populated sectors. The herald had been an entertaining diversion, but the real work of empire building still awaited. Word of the herald's defeat propagated through subspace channels faster than light itself. Within hours, every major civilization in the sector knew that something had bested Galactus's emissary in direct combat. The news triggered responses ranging from panic to strategic calculation, but one constant emerged across all reactions: fear of the unknown entity now moving freely through their territories. Frieza observed these responses with satisfaction. Fear was currency in any empire, and he'd just deposited a substantial amount into the cosmic consciousness. But fear alone built nothing lasting. It could paralyze opposition, certainly, but sustainable dominion required infrastructure. Subjects who served through terror and incentive both. Resources to fuel expansion. Most critically, intelligence about this universe's power structures, so he could identify which entities to avoid and which to eliminate. His trajectory carried him toward a region where three empires met in contested space. The Kree, Shi'ar, and Skrull had fought over these systems for centuries, their borders shifting based on military victories and diplomatic maneuvering. The constant conflict had created a buffer zone where authority remained ambiguous and local warlords operated with relative independence. Perfect conditions for what Frieza had in mind. The first target presented itself as a Kree military outpost that had been abandoned during recent political upheaval. The station drifted in high orbit around a lifeless moon, its automated defenses still active despite the absence of crew. Sensor arrays tracked his approach and weapon systems locked on, but the energy output barely registered as threatening. Frieza landed on the exterior hull and walked to the nearest airlock, his presence triggering alarms that had no one left to alert. He punched through the reinforced door with casual force atmosphere venting into space before emergency seals activated. The interior revealed standard military architecture, barracks, command centers, armories stocked with energy weapons and powered armor. More importantly, the station's central computer remained functional. Its databases containing fleet movements, communication protocols, and strategic assessments of regional forces. Frieza accessed the terminal without understanding the written language. But Ki could probe more than physical matter. He extended his senses into the computer's circuitry, feeling the patterns of data flow like reading a map written in electricity. Information downloaded directly into his consciousness, bypassing the need for translation. Troop deployments, supply routes, political tensions within the Kree Empire that had led to this outpost's abandonment. Officers who might be persuaded to switch allegiances if properly motivated. He spent 3 hours absorbing everything the database contained, then moved to the station's communications array. The message he broadcast was simple and went out on all major military frequencies simultaneously. Any forces currently operating without clear command structure were invited to meet at coordinates he specified. Those who came would receive protection resources and the opportunity to serve in an organization that valued competence over politics. Those who refused would be treated as obstacles. The first responses arrived within 20 minutes. Some were threats bravado from minor warlords who thought themselves dangerous. Others were cautious inquiries, commanders testing whether this was trap or legitimate offer. A few were immediate acceptances from desperate groups who recognized opportunity when it appeared. Over the next 2 days, ships began arriving at the rendezvous point. Kree destroyers whose captains had been cut off during the Empire's recent civil war, Skrull raiding parties that had operated as pirates after their homeworld's destruction, even a few Shi'ar vessels whose crews had grown tired of serving an empire that treated them as expendable. They came in ones and twos at first, then in larger groups as word spread that the entity behind the broadcast delivered on its promises. Frieza met with each group personally, a calculated decision that reinforced the message power here came from an individual, not a bureaucracy. Some commanders tried to negotiate from positions of imagined strength. He killed them efficiently and promoted their subordinates on the spot. Others recognized reality immediately and pledged loyalty without theatrics. These he assigned to organizational roles befitting their competence. The structure he built was familiar because it worked. Soldiers at the bottom, ruthless and skilled. Officers in the middle, ambitious enough to excel, but aware that failure meant death. Himself at the apex, absolute authority backed by power that made resistance suicidal. He mixed the races deliberately, Kree working alongside Skrull, alongside Shi'ar, their historical hatreds subordinated to the simple understanding that disobedience had one consequence. Within a week, Frieza commanded a fleet of 47 vessels and roughly 8,000 troops. Not an army by galactic standards, but a functional core that could expand through conquest and recruitment. More importantly, he now possessed the infrastructure to project power systematically, rather than through random destruction. The converted Kree outpost became his primary base, its abandoned corridors repopulated with soldiers who understood their purpose expansion. Frieza instituted training regimens that combined their technological capabilities with basic exposure to key principles. He couldn't teach them to manipulate their own life energy, not in any time frame that mattered. But he could demonstrate how to recognize it in others, how to measure power levels without depending on faulty equipment, how to understand when retreat was intelligence rather than cowardice. His first organized campaign targeted a Shi'ar colony that had ignored evacuation orders, its governor convinced that isolation would provide protection. Frieza sent 3 ships to demand surrender. When the governor refused, he arrived personally and reduced the planetary defense grid to slag in under 10 minutes. The governor surrendered before the first building was damaged, and Frieza accepted with terms that were harsh but survivable tribute conscripts and acknowledgement of new authority. Word of the colony's bloodless conquest spread alongside stories of the White Nova campaign's devastation. A pattern emerged in how civilizations responded to him. Those who resisted immediately were destroyed. Those who negotiated in good faith were incorporated into the expanding empire with their hierarchies mostly intact. The message was clear. Opposition meant extinction, but cooperation offered survival under new management. Within 3 weeks of arriving in this universe, Frieza controlled a territory spanning 7 star systems. His forces patrolled shipping lanes and extracted tribute from trade vessels. His reputation preceded him into new sectors, making conquests faster as smart commanders surrendered before battle became necessary. The Frieza force, rebuilt from components of this universe's militaries, functioned with the efficiency its original incarnation had demonstrated across Universe 7. He stood in the station's command center one evening, if such terms as evening had meaning in space, and surveyed holographic displays showing his territory. Each system marked in red on the tactical map represented power consolidated under single authority. Each planet rendered in his service was a resource to fuel further expansion. The speed of growth pleased him, though he recognized it as finite. Eventually, he would push against established empires too large to absorb quickly, and then real warfare would begin. But that was a problem for future consideration. For now, he had transformed from lone destroyer to empire builder, and this universe was learning to fear not just his power, but his organization. A subordinate, one of the Kree commanders who had proven competent enough to merit proximity to command, approached with a report. Intelligence suggested that major powers were beginning to coordinate responses. The Nova Corps was establishing blockades. Various heroes and cosmic entities had been observed investigating the White Nova campaign's aftermath. Most concerning something called the Avengers had apparently begun gathering information about the entity claiming territory in their universe's outer regions. Frieza listened to the report without visible concern. Let them gather information. Let them coordinate and strategize and convince themselves that preparation would matter. When they finally came for him, he would demonstrate the gap between their understanding of power and the reality of what he represented. Until then, the Empire would continue its expansion, and this universe would learn what it meant to exist under the rule of a tyrant who had toppled gods. The War Council convened in a shielded facility 3 light-years from Frieza's expanding territory. Representatives from a dozen civilizations crowded the chamber, their voices overlapping in desperate argument about response strategies. The Shi'ar demanded immediate military intervention. The Kree advocated for negotiated boundaries. The Skrulls, pragmatic as always, suggested abandoning contested sectors entirely and fortifying core worlds. Carol Danvers listened to the chaos with growing frustration. As one of Earth's representatives and someone with actual combat experience against cosmic-level threats, she understood what most of these politicians refused to accept. Traditional warfare was irrelevant here. You didn't negotiate with something that had defeated the Silver Surfer and carved out an empire in 3 weeks. You either stopped it decisively or got out of its way. Enough! Thor's voice cut through the arguing like thunder through fog. The god of thunder stood at the chamber's center Stormbreaker, resting against his shoulder. We waste time with debate while worlds burn. I have faced conquerors before. Tyrants who believed power granted them dominion over all. They learned otherwise. This isn't Malekith or Hela, Carol said quietly. Surfer's report was clear. This thing operates on a completely different power scale. It treated power cosmic like an inconvenience. Bruce Banner, present via hologram from Earth, adjusted his glasses with the careful precision of someone constantly managing dual personalities. The energy readings we've collected don't match anything in known databases. It's not cosmic radiation, not magical in nature, not even similar to the Infinity Stone's signatures. Whatever this entity is, it's genuinely extra-universal. Then we hit it with everything simultaneously. The statement came from Bob Reynolds, the Sentry, whose golden aura flickered in agitation even through the holographic projection. Overwhelming force before it can adapt or escalate further. Carol studied the tactical display, showing Frieza's territory marked in crimson. 7 star systems under complete control. Another 5 in various stages of subjugation. The expansion rate was accelerating, not slowing. Guardians of the Galaxy are providing transport and navigation. If we're doing this, we do it on terrain that minimizes collateral damage. Varon 9, offered Rocket's voice from the comm system. Barren, rock-stable gravity, nobody's lived there for 1,000 years. We can draw him there with the right bait. Thor's expression hardened. I mislike the notion of bait, but circumstances demand pragmatism. Very well. We assemble a strike force and end this threat before it reaches inhabited sectors. The plan took shape over the next hour. 4 primary combatants, Thor, for divine power and experience against cosmic threats. Hulk for raw strength that increased under pressure. Captain Marvel for energy projection and tactical coordination. Sentry for reality warping. That could match almost anything the universe produced. Supporting elements would include Guardians for extraction if things went wrong, and several Nova Corps members maintaining a perimeter to prevent escape. 20 hours later, they stood on Varon 9's rust-colored surface under a sky stained purple by the nearby nebula. The planet's gravity registered slightly higher than Earth standard, but nothing that would impair combat effectiveness. Mountain ranges stretched across the horizon in jagged formations that had never known erosion. The air, thin but breathable, carried a metallic taste that reminded Carol of blood. Frieza arrived exactly when the intelligence report predicted he would his trajectory, bringing him through the upper atmosphere without deceleration burns or entry protocols. He simply stopped 40 feet above the ground and regarded the assembled heroes with visible amusement. How considerate, he said, his voice carrying easily despite the thin air. A welcoming committee. I had wondered when this universe's self-proclaimed protectors would gather courage for direct confrontation. Thor stepped forward, lightning crackling between his fingers and across Stormbreaker's blade. You have murdered billions, claimed territory through terror. Your rampage ends here, creature. Creature. Frieza tilted his head tail, swishing in what might have been irritation or entertainment. How pedestrian. I am Lord Frieza, and what I have claimed belongs to me by right of power. A concept your kind seems to have forgotten in all your moralizing about justice and protection. Big words for someone about to get his teeth kicked in. Hulk's growl rumbled like tectonic plates grinding. The green giant's fists, clenched muscles swelling as anger built toward combat readiness. Indeed, then please demonstrate. Hulk moved first because Hulk always moved first. His leap covered the distance in a single-bound fist drawn back for a punch that had shattered alien dreadnoughts. The blow connected with Frieza's crossed arms, and the resulting shockwave flattened the ground for 300 yards in all directions. Mountains in the distance cracked from the pressure wave. The purple sky rippled like disturbed water. Frieza hadn't moved an inch. Adequate strength. He observed, still holding Hulk's fist against his forearms. But strength without speed is merely mass in motion. He pushed, and Hulk flew backward faster than he'd come forward. Thor was already in motion, Stormbreaker descending in an arc wreathed with lightning. The impact would have split a moon. Frieza caught the weapon's haft one-handed, stopping its momentum completely. Electricity played across his arm, blackening the white skin, but causing no apparent damage beyond cosmetic. Carol hit him from behind with a photon blast calibrated to her maximum output. The beam had enough energy to glass a city. It splashed across Frieza's back like water against stone, dispersing into harmless light. He turned his head to regard her with something approaching interest. Energy projection. Efficient conversion of absorbed radiation into coherent attack. You'd make a decent soldier with proper training. Then Sentry arrived, and the battlefield transformed. Golden energy erupted from Bob Reynolds like a miniature sun going nova. The Sentry's power operated on principles that bent reality itself, probability and possibility, warping to accommodate his subconscious will. When he struck Frieza with a double-fisted blow, space itself seemed to crack from the impact. Frieza actually slid backward several feet, furrows carved in the bedrock from his heels. He straightened and examined his chest where the blow had landed. A faint discoloration marked the impact point, not quite a bruise, but evidence of force that had actually registered. Interesting. His smile widened. You're different from the others. Unstable power output, but the peaks are genuinely threatening. He rolled his shoulders and golden light began bleeding from his body like liquid metal, which means I should stop treating this as a casual encounter. The transformation was subtle, but the power shift was not. Frieza's white and purple form shifted to gold and purple, the change accompanied by a pressure wave that drove everyone back several steps. Carol's energy sensors screamed warnings as power readings climbed past any scale they'd been designed to measure. The air itself seemed to thicken, reality struggling to accommodate the density of ki, suddenly concentrated in one location. That's not possible, Bruce's voice crackled through the comm. The energy output just increased by 3 orders of magnitude. That's not transformation, that's complete restructuring of fundamental force constants. Thor roared and called lightning from the nebula above. Purple streaks answered his summons, cascading down in a storm that would have sterilized a continent. Frieza walked through it like rain, each lightning bolt deflecting off his aura before making contact. He reached Thor in 3 steps that crossed 100 yards and delivered a punch to the god's midsection that drove every molecule of air from his lungs. The god of thunder doubled over, and Frieza's knee rose to meet his face. The impact sent Thor tumbling across the plateau, his trajectory only arrested when he crashed into a mountain hard enough to collapse its eastern face. Hulk came again, angrier, now stronger for it. His blows fell like meteors, each one carrying more force than the last, as rage amplified his power. Frieza deflected them with open palms, redirecting kinetic energy into the ground until the battlefield resembled a cratered moonscape. When Hulk overextended on a right cross, Frieza caught his wrist and spun, using the Green Giant's own momentum to slam him face first into the bedrock with enough force to create an impact crater 50 feet deep. Carol attacked from above with everything she had, both hands, projecting continuous photon streams that could have cut through starship hulls. Frieza raised one hand, and the beams simply stopped, absorbed into his palm and converted to harmless heat that dissipated into the atmosphere. His other hand pointed upward and released a thin purple beam no wider than his finger. The death beam punched through Carol's defenses like they weren't there, burning a hole through her shoulder that cauterized instantly from the heat. She managed to arrest her descent 20 feet from the ground, but the injury had disrupted her energy flow enough to remove her from immediate combat effectiveness. Sentry screamed, and reality bent. His golden aura expanded into a dome of warped space, where physics became suggestions rather than laws. Inside that field, he could dictate outcomes through sheer force of will. He reached for Frieza with hands that could unmake matter at the atomic level. Frieza met him in the center of the reality distortion. Their exchange happened too fast for observation, a blur of gold against gold, as two fundamentally different types of power tested themselves against each other. Each collision released energy that scarred the landscape for miles. The plateau they fought on began sinking into the planetary crust from accumulated damage. "You're holding back," Frieza said during a momentary separation. His breathing hadn't changed, his stance remained relaxed. "I can feel something else inside you. Something darker and considerably more dangerous than this golden facade." Bob's expression twisted. "You don't want that. Nobody wants that. On the contrary." Frieza's aura pulsed brighter, then shifted. Gold darkened to black. His hands and feet turned dark gray. The white of his face and torso remained, but the rest of his form had transformed into something that made his previous power output seem like a candle compared to a star. "I want to see what happens when I stop holding back too." The pressure was immediate and overwhelming. Every combatant still conscious felt it like a weight settling on their chests. Thor, pulling himself from the collapsed mountain, actually sank to one knee. Hulk, climbing from his crater, found his muscles trembling, despite rage that should have pushed him past any fatigue. Carol's energy reserves, already depleted, simply refused to regenerate under the oppressive aura. Sentry stood frozen, his reality-warping power encountering something it couldn't process. The void stirred within him, drawn to the challenge. But even that dark reflection of his might recognized the gap in their respective capabilities. Frieza moved, and the world ended for Bob Reynolds. The punch came from a direction that shouldn't have existed, traveling through space that had been empty a microsecond before. It connected with his solar plexus, and the Sentry's golden aura shattered like glass. He folded around the fist, then flew backward fast enough to leave a sonic boom crater where he'd been standing. He didn't get back up. Frieza stood alone in the center of the devastation, surrounded by the universe's greatest heroes, all of them defeated or incapacitated within minutes of his transformation. His black and white form radiated power that made the air shimmer with heat distortion despite the cold planetary atmosphere. "Is this the best you can offer?" His question carried across the battlefield with terrible clarity. "The Avengers." Earth's mightiest heroes, guardians of entire galaxies. All of you barely worth the effort of transformation. Thor forced himself upright, using Stormbreaker as a crutch. Blood ran from a dozen wounds, but he managed to meet Frieza's gaze. This changes nothing. Others will come, stronger than us. They will stop you. Let them come. Frieza turned away, already losing interest in the broken heroes. Tell your stronger allies what happened here. Tell them I welcome challenges, but also tell them that I am no longer simply destroying. I am building, and anyone who interferes with my empire will face the same fate you have today. He ascended without another word, black form disappearing into the purple sky. Behind him, the Avengers coalition lay shattered across a planet that would never recover from serving as their battleground. In orbit, the Guardian's ship received the extraction signal and moved in to collect survivors. Rocket stared at his instruments in disbelief at the readings they'd recorded during the battle. That's not possible. Nothing outputs that much power. It'd collapse into a singularity before reaching those levels. Gamora's expression was grim as she activated emergency medical protocols. Possible or not, it just happened. And we're going to need a very different strategy if we ever face that thing again. Below them, Varon 9 burned from residual energy, still dissipating across its scarred surface. The planet that had witnessed the Avengers' defeat would carry those scars for millennia, a monument to the day Earth's protectors learned that some threats existed beyond their capacity to challenge. News of the Avengers' defeat reached Thanos within hours. The Mad Titan sat upon his throne aboard Sanctuary 2, fingers steepled beneath his chin as he reviewed tactical data transmitted from a dozen intelligence sources. Holographic displays showed the Varon 9 battlefield in excruciating detail, impact craters spanning miles, atmospheric disturbances that would persist for decades. Energy signatures that defied conventional analysis. Most concerning was the footage of the entity's final transformation. Black and white where it had been gold and purple power output, spiking beyond what ship sensors could accurately measure before they overloaded. The Sentry, a being whose reality warping abilities had troubled even Thanos in past encounters, eliminated with a single blow. Interesting, Thanos murmured. His expression revealed nothing but his mind-calculated possibilities with the precision of a supercomputer analyzing battlefield variables. This newcomer operated outside established power hierarchies. No allegiance to abstract entities, no debt to cosmic forces, no apparent connection to the Infinity Stone's influence. Simply raw might exercised with the confidence of one who had never encountered meaningful opposition. Such beings were either natural disasters to be avoided or obstacles requiring elimination. Thanos did not believe in sharing dominion over reality with competitors. He stood armor plates shifting with the movement and began preparations. Titan's ruins would serve as the arena. The shattered homeworld where his ambitions had first crystallized offered tactical advantages, familiar terrain, prepared defenses, hidden among the rubble, and symbolic weight that might provide psychological leverage. If this entity truly was a conqueror, it would understand the significance of facing a rival on the bones of his civilization. The message Thanos broadcast was simple and direct, transmitted on frequencies that anyone monitoring galactic communications would intercept. A challenge issued to the one calling himself Frieza. Coordinates to Titan. An invitation to discuss territorial boundaries between powers of sufficient magnitude to enforce their will. Thanos did not expect diplomacy. He expected battle. But battles could be won through preparation as much as raw strength, and the Mad Titan had never been one to rely solely on physical prowess. Frieza received the transmission aboard his converted Kree outpost. He listened to Thanos' measured words with amusement that grew into genuine interest. Another tyrant, then. One with enough intelligence to recognize that their paths would inevitably cross, and enough courage to dictate the terms of that crossing. Lord Frieza, one of his Kree commanders ventured carefully. Intelligence suggests this Thanos individual is extremely dangerous. Multiple failed attempts at universal conquest, documented defeats of planetary defenders, rumored connections to cosmic entities. Perhaps we should accept with enthusiasm, Frieza interrupted. How refreshing to meet someone in this universe who understands that power grants privilege rather than obligation. Ready my personal transport. I'll handle this matter alone. The journey to Titan took 6 hours at faster-than-light speeds that would have been impossible without appropriated alien technology. Frieza spent the time reviewing what intelligence his forces had gathered on Thanos. A fascinating profile emerged: genius-level intellect, physical capabilities, enhanced through bionic augmentation and natural mutation. Tactical brilliance demonstrated across centuries of warfare. Most intriguingly, a philosophy that advocated balance through culling, though his methods for achieving it had evolved from surgical to apocalyptic after acquiring certain artifacts. The Titan himself was formidable even without external enhancements. With them, he had troubled beings far beyond mortal scope. But the reports all emphasized one consistent detail. Thanos succeeded through preparation and planning. He rarely confronted superior force directly without advantage of terrain technology or circumstance, which meant the ruins of his homeworld would be trapped extensively. Titan emerged from hyperspace as a brown sphere scarred by ancient catastrophe. Atmospheric composition showed toxic levels of industrial pollutants never cleaned after civilization collapsed. The surface revealed cities frozen in various stages of decay, monuments to hubris that had consumed a species from within. At the planet's equator, one structure stood more intact than others, a palace complex where Thanos had apparently chosen to make his stand. Frieza descended through the polluted atmosphere without environmental protection. The toxins were irrelevant to his physiology. He touched down in the palace's central courtyard, a space that might have hosted celebrations or executions depending on the Empire's mood. Rubble lined the perimeter. Broken statues gazed at nothing with empty stone eyes. Thanos waited at the courtyard's far end, seated on a throne of welded scrap metal and ancient stone. His armor reflected the planet's dim sunlight in purple and gold highlights. No weapon rested in his hands, but the very stillness of his posture communicated readiness. "You came alone," Thanos observed. His voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Arrogance or confidence? Why not both?" Frieza replied, tail swishing as he studied the courtyard with feigned casualness. His ki senses detected at least 40 separate energy signatures hidden among the ruins. Automated weapons, gravitational traps, spatial distortion fields, an impressive array of insurance policies. "You've prepared quite the reception. Should I be flattered?" "You should be cautious." Thanos rose from his throne with deliberate slowness. "I've studied you, Frieza. 3 weeks in this universe, and you've carved an empire from civilizations that stood for millennia. Defeated the Silver Surfer, humiliated Earth's Avengers, power without precedent, wielded without restraint." He began walking forward, each step measured. "But power alone does not guarantee victory. I have toppled beings who moved stars. Intelligence and preparation often defeat raw might." Frieza's smile widened. "Then by all means demonstrate your preparation." The courtyard exploded into violence. Gravitational anchors, hidden in the rubble, activated simultaneously, attempting to pin Frieza in place through force equivalent to a collapsing star. Energy cannons emerged from concealed positions and fired in coordinated salvos, their beams calibrated to frequencies that had once troubled Celestials. The ground beneath Frieza's feet erupted as shaped charges detonated, attempting to drive him into a spatial distortion field that would have shunted him into the negative zone. For 3 seconds, the barrage continued with the precision of a symphony conducted by a genius. Every angle covered every escape route, anticipated every countermeasure, prepared for countermeasures. The tactical display in Thanos' armor showed successful target acquisition across all systems. Then Frieza walked through it. The gravitational anchors cracked and failed as key density simply overwrote their influence on local space-time. Energy beams splashed harmlessly against his aura, absorbed and dispersed before touching skin. The spatial distortion field activated, but found nothing to grasp as Frieza moved through the dimensional tear without apparent effort, as if the boundary between realities was merely a suggestion he chose to ignore. He stopped 10 feet from Thanos, completely unaffected by defenses that had required months to design and implement. Impressive engineering. You clearly put thought into this encounter, but you made one critical error in your calculations. And that would be... Thanos kept his voice level despite internal alarms, screaming that his primary strategy had failed completely. You assumed I would fight you seriously. Frieza's form shifted black and dark gray, bleeding across white and purple. The transformation was instant, no build-up or dramatic posturing. Simply a change in state that made the air scream from a pressure differential. Allow me to correct that assumption. Thanos moved with speed that belied his size, closing the distance and driving a fist toward Frieza's face with enough force to shatter adamantium. The punch connected cleanly Thanos' superior reach and timing, giving him first strike advantage. Frieza's head turned maybe 3 degrees from the impact. That was the extent of the effect. The Mad Titan's eyes widened fractionally, the first crack in his impassive facade. He'd struck gods with that blow. Cracked moon surfaces, felt bones break and armor crumple. This creature's head had moved less than human skin would compress under a fingertip. Frieza's tail whipped around faster than Thanos could track and wrapped around his throat. The constriction was immediate and absolute, cutting off air and beginning to compress the enhanced musculature of the Titan's neck. Thanos grabbed the tail with both hands, strength that could lift continental plates straining to create separation. The tail didn't budge. Your intelligence is wasted on inadequate tools, Frieza said conversationally, as if not currently strangling one of the universe's most dangerous beings. Strength, tactics, preparation, all admirable qualities. But they operate within the same framework as everything else in this reality. I don't. He released Thanos and delivered a kick to the chest that sent the Titan flying backward through 3 collapsed buildings. The impacts generated seismic shockwaves that toppled additional structures across the ruined city. Thanos rolled with the momentum, using debris to arrest his flight, and came up with a device in his hand. The artifact looked ancient, its surface covered in symbols from a dead language. When activated, it released a pulse of exotic radiation that had once wounded a Celestial. The energy washed over Frieza in a wave designed to disrupt neural function at the quantum level. Frieza felt a mild headache. What was that supposed to accomplish? Thanos' expression finally shifted to something approaching concern. His contingencies were exhausted. Every preparation had failed. The being before him operated on principles that his genius could observe but not counter. Raw power at a scale that invalidated tactical advantage. He'd made one final calculation error, assuming he could withdraw if primary strategies failed. Looking at Frieza's expression, Thanos realized extraction was no longer an option. The beating was methodical and educational. Frieza didn't kill, didn't maim permanently, but delivered measured punishment that demonstrated exactly how wide the gulf between their capabilities truly was. Each blow carried just enough force to inflict pain and damage without ending the fight prematurely. Thanos' armor cracked and fell away in pieces. His enhanced physiology, normally capable of healing from grievous wounds, struggled to keep pace with accumulated trauma. After 5 minutes that felt like hours, Frieza held Thanos by the throat again, the Mad Titan's feet dangling above the courtyard's broken stone. Blood ran from multiple wounds. One eye had swollen shut. His breathing came in labored gasps. "You're not without merit," Frieza said, examining Thanos like a scientist might study a particularly interesting specimen. "Your intellect is genuine, your tactical acumen impressive for one limited to this universe's parameters. Under different circumstances, I might have recruited you." He released his grip and let Thanos collapse to the ground. "But your philosophy troubles me. Balance through culling resource management through genocide. How pedestrian." Thanos coughed blood and managed to speak through damaged vocal cords. "And your philosophy, power for its own sake." "Power exercised efficiently," Frieza corrected. "I don't eliminate populations to preserve resources. I conquer them to exploit those resources more effectively. Every subject alive serves my empire. Every world claimed generates value. Your approach wastes potential in service of abstract balance." He turned to leave, already dismissing the fallen Titan from consideration. "Remain here among your failures, philosopher. Contemplate what actual dominion looks like when wielded by someone who understands that power's only purpose is to acquire more power." He ascended without looking back, black form disappearing into Titan's toxic sky. Behind him, Thanos lay broken in the ruins of his homeworld, defeated by the same absolute power he had spent lifetimes trying to acquire. The palace complex groaned and began collapsing, structural integrity compromised by their battle. Thanos dragged himself away from the falling debris with movements that spoke of extensive internal damage. His ship detected his distress and began automated recovery protocols. As medical systems worked to stabilize his condition, Thanos reviewed the battle data with what remained of his analytical focus. The entity called Frieza represented something unprecedented. Not a cosmic abstract bound by universal function. Not a reality warper constrained by psychological limits. Simply power, pure, directed, and apparently limitless within its demonstrated scope. The Infinity Stones, Thanos realized, might not be sufficient to challenge such a being. That thought troubled him more than his physical injuries ever could. Above Titan, Frieza's ship received him with efficiency born of fear. His subordinates noted the lack of visible damage and understood their lord had faced another famous tyrant and emerged without a scratch. "Set course for the next sector," Frieza ordered, settling into his command throne. Thanos was a disappointment. Perhaps the Celestials will prove more interesting. The ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving Titan to its silence and its broken would-be conqueror. Another victory for the White Tyrant. Another demonstration that in this universe, as in his own power, recognized no authority but greater power. And nothing greater had yet emerged to challenge him. The disturbance had become impossible to ignore. Across multiple dimensions, energy patterns disrupted flows that had remained stable for billions of years. Cosmic constants wobbled. Fundamental forces required minute recalibration to maintain universal stability. The source was singular, localized, and growing more pronounced with each passing cycle. In Void Sector 7, a region of space so empty that even atoms were rare, a celestial materialized. The being stood 2,000 feet tall, humanoid in silhouette, but alien in every detail that mattered. Its armor gleamed with colors that had no names in any mortal language panels, engraved with equations describing reality's deepest functions. Within that armor lived consciousness older than most galaxies, purpose refined across epochs into singular clarity. The Celestial had been dispatched to evaluate. Not to destroy, not initially, but to measure the disruption against acceptable parameters. If the entity causing these distortions proved compatible with universal order, observation would continue. If not, correction would be implemented with the same dispassion applied to pruning diseased tissue. Frieza felt the Celestial's arrival before sensors registered it. The being's presence created ripples in space that his key sense interpreted as enormous weight pressing against reality's fabric. He altered course immediately, curiosity overriding his planned trajectory. Something that large, that dense with power, deserved investigation. They met in vacuum's absolute cold, two entities separated by millennia of evolution and utterly incompatible philosophies. The Celestial observed Frieza with senses that perceived across 17-dimensional axes simultaneously. It cataloged energy signatures, analyzed structural composition, traced the entity's origin to a dimensional breach that should not have been possible given current universal parameters. Frieza studied the Celestial with considerably simpler, but no less effective methodologies. This thing was massive, radiating power, and probably thought itself important. Time to test assumptions. Impressive construction, he called across the void, voice carried by Kai rather than sound. Are you the local authority come to negotiate terms, or just another cosmic entity overestimating its significance? The Celestial's response came not as words, but as pure concept transmitted directly to consciousness. Evaluation in progress. Compliance required. Disruption beyond acceptable thresholds. Correction imminent if parameters not satisfied. How tedious. Frieza's aura flared black and dark gray around his form. Everyone in this universe speaks in absolutes. Compliance, parameters, correction. Has no one here learned that power writes its own rules? The Celestial raised one enormous hand. Energy gathered at the palm, not ki or cosmic radiation, but something more fundamental. The attack, when released, didn't travel through space so much as convince space itself to collapse around the target. Gravity intensified to stellar core densities in a sphere centered on Frieza's position. Light bent inward. Matter would have compressed to atomic plasma instantly. Frieza remained precisely where he was unbothered. His ki pushed back against the gravitational manipulation with equal force, creating a dead zone where neither influence dominated. The standoff lasted 3 seconds before he grew bored and released a death beam from one finger. The purple lance crossed the distance in microseconds and struck the Celestial's chest armor with enough concentrated force to punch through neutronium. The armor cracked. Not shattered, not breached completely, but visibly damaged, a hairline fracture spreading across panels that had withstood supernovas and dimensional collapses. The Celestial's senses, calibrated to measure universal constants, struggled to process what had occurred. Its armor was constructed from compressed matter stabilized by fundamental forces manipulation. Damaging it required energy output equivalent to stellar ignition, or exotic particles existing outside standard physics. This entity had done so with what appeared to be pure will focused through biological processes. Unacceptable variable detected. Threat assessment escalated. Termination protocols authorized. The Celestial's attack intensified. Both hands rose, and reality within 1,000 miles began restructuring. Physical laws rewrote themselves according to equations favorable to the Celestials' continued function and hostile to carbon-based life. Temperature dropped to absolute zero. Entropy accelerated toward heat death. The strong nuclear force weakened, threatening to unmake matter at the atomic level. Frieza felt the changes, attempting to take hold in his body, and simply refused them. His ki operated outside this universe's standard physics. Convincing reality to rewrite itself only worked on entities bound by reality's rules. He accelerated toward the Celestial, crossing the distance, while space itself tried to slow him through gravitational manipulation and spatial expansion. His fist connected with the cracked armor. The impact released energy equivalent to a gamma-ray burst. The Celestial staggered, actually moved backward from force, applied its mass displaced, despite mechanisms designed to anchor it across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The crack in its armor widened, branching into new fractures that spread like lightning across the chest plate. For the first time in millions of years, a Celestial experienced something approximating alarm. This should not be possible. The entity before it was finite biological, despite enhancements constrained by the same thermodynamic principles governing all mortal existence. Yet it struck with force that challenged celestial durability, moved at speeds that ignored relativistic limits, and shrugged off reality manipulation that should have reduced it to constituent quarks. The Celestial attempted to withdraw to create distance for analysis and recalibration. Frieza pursued with speed that made the concept of distance meaningless. His attacks came in a blur, punches, kicks, energy beams fired at point-blank range into the spreading cracks in celestial armor. Each impact widened existing damage, carved new furrows, demonstrated that even beings designed to judge worlds were not beyond physical harm when sufficient force was applied. After 90 seconds of sustained assault, Frieza stopped and drifted backward. The Celestial floated motionless, its armor showing extensive damage across the torso region. Energy leaked from multiple breaches, the being's equivalent of blood. It had not fallen, had not been destroyed, but the fight was clearly over. Fascinating. Frieza observed, examining his hands for damage and finding none. You're more durable than anything I've encountered in this universe. That armor of yours might actually require my full attention to breach completely. He smiled with genuine appreciation. But we both know how this ends if I continue. You'll withdraw to repair and report. I'll add damaged a Celestial to my list of accomplishments. Shall we skip the tedious finale? The Celestial's consciousness processed tactical data with computational speed exceeding human comprehension. Victory against this entity was not impossible, but would require reinforcements and risk extensive collateral damage to surrounding space. The mission was evaluation, not martyrdom. Data collected was sufficient for analysis. Withdrawal was logical. Assessment complete. Entity designated extreme threat. Higher authority notification initiated. Observation continues remotely. The Celestial vanished, not fleeing, but executing controlled dimensional shift that removed it from local space entirely. The damaged armor panels would regenerate given time. The cracks Frieza had inflicted would seal. But the memory of this encounter would persist in celestial consciousness, archived alongside other instances of entities demonstrating power beyond predicted parameters. Frieza watched the space where the Celestial had been and felt satisfaction settle over him like a comfortable cloak. He'd cracked divine armor, forced a cosmic judge to retreat, demonstrated that even this universe's eldest entities were not immune to violence applied with sufficient conviction. The implications rippled outward through communication networks he couldn't perceive. Abstract entities took notice, The living tribunal observed with interest that something outside standard power hierarchies had emerged. Eternity, still recovering from universal reconstruction, registered the anomaly with concern that approached alarm. And in hidden places among beings who understood that some threats required coordination rather than individual response plans began forming. The entity calling itself Frieza had proven too dangerous to ignore and too powerful for conventional intervention. Unconventional methods would be necessary. Frieza, unaware of the cosmic attention he'd attracted, set course for his empire's borders. The Celestial had been a worthy test confirmation that his black form could challenge even this reality's fundamental powers. But fighting judges was ultimately pointless. Empire building remained the priority. He would learn soon enough that judges, when sufficiently concerned, could become executioners. Chapter 8. The Ceiling. The Sanctum Sanctorum had never hosted such an unlikely gathering. Doctor Strange stood at the center of a ritual circle that glowed with power drawn from multiple dimensional sources, his expression carved from concentration and exhaustion. Around him, beings who rarely cooperated, even during existential crises, had assembled through sheer necessity. Reed Richards worked at a portable console adjusting equations that described pocket dimension mechanics with the precision of someone who had mapped alternate realities for decades. His face showed the strain of 72 hours without sleep, but his hands remained steady as they input final calculations. "The dimensional anchor is holding," Reed reported without looking up from his screens. "But we'll only have one opportunity. If he realizes what we're attempting before the trap closes, he'll simply overpower the binding force through raw output. Then we ensure he doesn't realize." Strange's voice carried the weight of someone who had examined thousands of possible futures and found only a handful where victory was possible. "The vision showed me the exact sequence. One deviation, and we lose our window." Around the ritual space, others waited with varying degrees of tension. Norin Rad, the Silver Surfer, had returned despite his injuries to lend power cosmic to the binding spell. His presence was necessary, but clearly pained him. No herald enjoyed admitting a threat existed beyond Galactus's capacity to address alone. Several Nova Corps members maintained the perimeter, their world mind calculating probability matrices that grew less favorable with each passing minute. Most critically, representatives of abstract entities had provided power for the trap itself. Not the entities themselves, who remained bound by cosmic law from direct intervention in mortal affairs, but fragments of their essence channeled through willing conduits. The energy hummed with potential that made reality's fabric strain to contain it. "He's approaching Sayu Dansuna," one of the Nova Corps members announced, her helmet's sensors tracking an energy signature moving through local space at impossible velocities. "ETA 3 minutes. Strange's hands moved through gestures that left afterimages glowing in 5 colors simultaneously. "Begin the lure. Make it believable." The bait was elegant in its simplicity, a distress signal from one of Frieza's conquered worlds, indicating rebellion and requesting his personal attention to quell the uprising. The message carried just enough genuine fear and desperation that it wouldn't seem like obvious trap. Tyrants. Strange knew from experience often underestimated how much their subjects feared them and that overconfidence could be exploited. Frieza materialized above the planet exactly where Strange's vision had shown he would. His black and white form hovered in high-orbit quiescences extending downward to probe for the source of disturbance. He found the signal's origin easily enough a fortified compound, broadcasting revolutionary rhetoric across planetary communication networks. Suspicious, certainly. Possibly a trap. But also possibly genuine dissent that required public suppression. Frieza descended toward the compound, ready to atomize whoever was responsible and broadcast the execution across his empire as an object lesson. The dimensional rift opened beneath him without warning. It wasn't a portal in any conventional sense. Space itself twisted into a configuration that had no stable solution in three-dimensional geometry, creating a void that existed perpendicular to normal reality. Frieza felt the pull immediately and tried to resist Ki flaring to anchor himself to local space-time. For a moment, raw power contested with geometric impossibility. Then Strange spoke a word in a language predating human civilization, and the trap activated fully. Power cosmic from Silver Surfer bound Frieza's limbs in silver chains that existed across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Energy borrowed from abstract entities compressed around him, like a fist closing each finger, representing a fundamental force turned against its natural function. Reed's dimensional anchor locked onto his position and began pulling, dragging him toward the rift with force that increased exponentially each microsecond. Frieza roared, and his aura exploded outward. The silver chains cracked. The abstract energy recoiled. The dimensional anchor strained against output that should have been impossible for any being constrained by thermodynamic limits. For 5 seconds, it seemed like he might simply overpower the entire apparatus through sheer refusal to be contained. Now, Strange's voice cut through the chaos. The ritual circle beneath the sanctum detonated with accumulated power, channeling everything they'd gathered directly into the pocket dimension. The geometric impossibility that was the rift became a geometric certainty, a space that existed and demanded to be filled. The anchor's pull increased beyond what Frieza's resistance could counter. He disappeared into the rift with a final burst of black energy that shattered every window within 50 miles of the sanctum. The dimensional tear sealed behind him with a sound like reality, sighing in relief. Strange collapsed immediately, his body pushed beyond reasonable limits. Reed caught him before he hit the floor, his own hands shaking from adrenaline crash. "Did it hold?" Reed asked, already pulling up diagnostic readings on the pocket dimension's integrity. Silver Surfer floated down through the sanctum's ceiling, his form flickering with power depletion. "The seal is intact. He cannot escape through conventional means or brute force. The pocket dimension has no walls to break, no borders to cross. It simply loops back on itself infinitely. How long will it contain him?" One of the Nova Corps members voiced the question everyone was thinking. Reed studied his equations with an expression that suggested the answer troubled him. Theoretically, indefinitely. The pocket dimension is self-sustaining drawing power from the dimensional membrane itself, as long as that membrane remains intact. He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Strange forced himself upright, despite exhaustion. But he will try to escape. Beings of that power level don't accept imprisonment gracefully. We've bought time, nothing more. "Time for what?" the Nova asked. "To find a permanent solution, to study him, to pray he doesn't figure out how to breach dimensional barriers we thought were absolute. Time to prepare," Strange said quietly. "Because if he does escape, we'll need every advantage we can gather. That entity nearly broke free through sheer power output. Next time, he'll be ready for our tactics." The group dispersed over the next hour, each returning to their respective duties with the weight of temporary victory. They had contained the threat, yes, but everyone present understood the difference between contained and eliminated. Frieza lived imprisoned in a space designed to hold him forever. Forever, in cosmic terms, was a dangerously relative concept. Inside the pocket dimension, Frieza floated in absolute darkness. No stars, no planets, no reference points of any kind. The space around him twisted back on itself. Flying in any direction simply returned him to his starting position. Every attack he launched was absorbed by dimensional boundaries that had no physical structure to damage. After an hour of testing the prison's limits, he stopped struggling and simply floated. Rage would be counterproductive. Panic was beneath him. Instead, he analyzed the trap with the same clinical detachment he'd apply to any strategic problem. They had caught him through coordination and preparation, assembling powers from multiple sources to create a whole greater than its parts. Clever, effective, worthy of grudging respect. But the trap's elegance revealed a fundamental truth. They feared him enough to imprison rather than confront directly. Fear was leverage, and leverage could be applied even from within a cage if one was patient enough to find the fulcrum point. Frieza closed his eyes and began to meditate, something he hadn't done since his time training in the hyperbolic time chamber. His ki, vast and terrible, started circulating through his body in precise patterns. Not trying to escape, not yet, but exploring the dimensional boundaries with methodical thoroughness. Every prison had weaknesses. Every seal had points of maximum stress. Time lost meaning in the absence of external reference. But Frieza had spent decades building an empire through patience and planning before power alone became sufficient. He could be patient again when circumstances demanded it. The dimensional membrane that formed his cage was strong, but not infinite. It drew power from somewhere, which meant a connection existed between this space and the outside universe. Connections could be traced, exploited, widened until they became exits. It would take time, possibly years by external measurement. But Frieza had learned long ago that the greatest weapon was not strength or speed, but the willingness to endure until opportunity presented itself. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, Dr. Strange stood before a scrying mirror that showed the pocket dimension's interior. He watched Frieza's black and white form, floating, motionless eyes closed, ki circulating in patterns that suggested meditation rather than struggle. "He's planning something," Strange murmured to Wong, who had entered quietly to check on his condition. "I can feel it. He's not raging or testing the boundaries anymore. He's thinking." "Is that worse?" Wong asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Strange didn't reply. He simply kept watching the mirror, knowing that somewhere in the darkness of that sealed dimension, a cosmic tyrant was learning patience and plotting his return. The white tyrant had been contained. But contained was not defeated. And everyone who had participated in the sealing knew that this victory was temporary at best. The only question was how long temporary would last. The Sanctum Sanctorum had never hosted such an unlikely gathering. Dr. Strange stood at the center of a ritual circle that glowed with power drawn from multiple dimensional sources, his expression carved from concentration and exhaustion. Around him, beings who rarely cooperated, even during existential crises, had assembled through sheer necessity. Reed Richards worked at a portable console, adjusting equations that described pocket dimension mechanics with the precision of someone who had mapped alternate realities for decades. His face showed the strain of 72 hours without sleep, but his hands remained steady as they input final calculations. "The dimensional anchor is holding," Reed reported without looking up from his screens. "But we'll only have one opportunity. If he realizes what we're attempting before the trap closes, he'll simply overpower the binding force through raw output. Then we ensure he doesn't realize." Strange's voice carried the weight of someone who had examined thousands of possible futures and found only a handful where victory was possible. "The vision showed me the exact sequence. One deviation, and we lose our window." Around the ritual space, others waited with varying degrees of tension. Norrin Rad, the Silver Surfer, had returned despite his injuries to lend power cosmic to the binding spell. His presence was necessary, but clearly pained him. No herald enjoyed admitting a threat existed beyond Galactus's capacity to address alone. Several Nova Corps members maintained the perimeter, their world mind calculating probability matrices that grew less favorable with each passing minute. Most critically representatives of abstract entities had provided power for the trap itself. Not the entities themselves, who remained bound by cosmic law from direct intervention in mortal affairs, but fragments of their essence channeled through willing conduits. The energy hummed with potential that made reality's fabric strain to contain it. "He's approaching," one of the Nova Corps members announced, her helmet sensors tracking an energy signature moving through local space at impossible velocities. "ETA, 3 minutes. Strange's hands moved through gestures that left after images glowing in 5 colors simultaneously. "Begin the lure. Make it believable." The bait was elegant in its simplicity, a distress signal from one of Frieza's conquered worlds, indicating rebellion and requesting his personal attention to quell the uprising. The message carried just enough genuine fear and desperation that it wouldn't seem like obvious trap. Tyrants. Strange knew from experience often underestimated how much their subjects feared them, and that overconfidence could be exploited. Frieza materialized above the planet exactly where Strange's vision had shown he would. His black and white form hovered in high-orbit key senses extending downward to probe for the source of disturbance. He found the signal's origin easily enough, a fortified compound broadcasting revolutionary rhetoric across planetary communication networks. Suspicious, certainly, possibly a trap, but also possibly genuine dissent that required public suppression. Frieza descended toward the compound, ready to atomize whoever was responsible, and broadcast the execution across his empire as an object lesson. The dimensional rift opened beneath him without warning. It wasn't a portal in any conventional sense. Space itself twisted into a configuration that had no stable solution in 3-dimensional geometry, creating a void that existed perpendicular to normal reality. Frieza felt the pull immediately and tried to resist Ki flaring to anchor himself to local space-time. For a moment, raw power contested with geometric impossibility. Then Strange spoke a word in a language predating human civilization, and the trap activated fully. Power cosmic from Silver Surfer bound Frieza's limbs in silver chains that existed across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. Energy borrowed from abstract entities compressed around him like a fist, closing each finger representing a fundamental force turned against its natural function. Reed's dimensional anchor locked onto his position and began pulling, dragging him toward the rift with force that increased exponentially each microsecond. Frieza roared, and his aura exploded outward. The silver chains cracked. The abstract energy recoiled. The dimensional anchor strained against output that should have been impossible for any being constrained by thermodynamic limits. For 5 seconds, it seemed like he might simply overpower the entire apparatus through sheer refusal to be contained. "Now!" Strange's voice cut through the chaos. The ritual circle beneath the sanctum detonated with accumulated power, channeling everything they'd gathered directly into the pocket dimension. The geometric impossibility that was the rift became a geometric certainty, a space that existed and demanded to be filled. The anchor's pull increased beyond what Frieza's resistance could counter. He disappeared into the rift with a final burst of black energy that shattered every window within 50 miles of the sanctum. The dimensional tear sealed behind him with a sound like reality sighing in relief. Strange collapsed immediately, his body pushed beyond reasonable limits. Reed caught him before he hit the floor, his own hands shaking from adrenaline crash. "Did it hold?" Reed asked, already pulling up diagnostic readings on the pocket dimension's integrity. Silver Surfer floated down through the sanctum's ceiling, his form flickering with power depletion. The seal is intact. He cannot escape through conventional means or brute force. The pocket dimension has no walls to break, no borders to cross. It simply loops back on itself infinitely. How long will it contain him? One of the Nova Corps members voiced the question everyone was thinking. Reed studied his equations with an expression that suggested the answer troubled him. Theoretically, indefinitely. The pocket dimension is self-sustaining, drawing power from the dimensional membrane itself. As long as that membrane remains intact. He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Strange forced himself upright despite exhaustion. But he will try to escape. Beings of that power level don't accept imprisonment gracefully. We've bought time, nothing more. Time for what? The Nova asked. To find a permanent solution, to study him, to pray he doesn't figure out how to breach dimensional barriers we thought were absolute. Time to prepare, Strange said quietly, because if he does escape, we'll need every advantage we can gather. That entity nearly broke free through sheer power output. Next time, he'll be ready for our tactics. The group dispersed over the next hour, each returning to their respective duties with the weight of temporary victory. They had contained the threat, yes, but everyone present understood the difference between contained and eliminated. Frieza lived imprisoned in a space designed to hold him forever. Forever in cosmic terms was a dangerously relative concept. Inside the pocket dimension, Frieza floated in absolute darkness. No stars, no planets, no reference points of any kind. The space around him twisted back on itself, flying in any direction, simply returned him to his starting position. Every attack he launched was absorbed by dimensional boundaries that had no physical structure to damage. After an hour of testing the prison's limits, he stopped struggling and simply floated. Rage would be counterproductive. Panic was beneath him. Instead, he analyzed the trap with the same clinical detachment he'd apply to any strategic problem. They had caught him through coordination and preparation, assembling powers from multiple sources to create a whole greater than its parts. Clever, effective, worthy of grudging respect. But the trap's elegance revealed a fundamental truth. They feared him enough to imprison rather than confront directly. Fear was leverage, and leverage could be applied even from within a cage if one was patient enough to find the fulcrum point. Frieza closed his eyes and began to meditate, something he hadn't done since his time training in the hyperbolic time chamber. His ki, vast and terrible, started circulating through his body in precise patterns. Not trying to escape, not yet, but exploring the dimensional boundaries with methodical thoroughness. Every prison had weaknesses. Every seal had points of maximum stress. Time lost meaning in the absence of external reference. But Frieza had spent decades building an empire through patience and planning, before power alone became sufficient. He could be patient again when circumstances demanded it. The dimensional membrane that formed his cage was strong but not infinite. It drew power from somewhere, which meant a connection existed between this space and the outside universe. Connections could be traced, exploited, widened until they became exits. It would take time, possibly years by external measurement. But Frieza had learned long ago that the greatest weapon was not strength or speed, but the willingness to endure until opportunity presented itself. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, Dr. Strange stood before a scrying mirror that showed the pocket dimension's interior. He watched Frieza's black and white form, floating motionless, eyes closed, ki circulating in patterns that suggested meditation rather than struggle. He's planning something, Strange murmured to Wong, who had entered quietly to check on his condition. I can feel it. He's not raging or testing the boundaries anymore. He's thinking. "Is that worse?" Wong asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Strange didn't reply. He simply kept watching the mirror, knowing that somewhere in the darkness of that sealed dimension, a cosmic tyrant was learning patience and plotting his return. The white tyrant had been contained. But contained was not defeated. And everyone who had participated in the sealing knew that this victory was temporary at best. The only question was how long temporary would last. Time inside the pocket dimension moved differently than in normal space. Or perhaps it didn't move at all, and only Frieza's perception created the illusion of progression. Days, weeks, months, the measurements meant nothing when no external reference existed to mark their passage. But Frieza's internal chronometer, honed through decades of conquest and waiting, estimated approximately 6 months had passed since his imprisonment. 6 months of meditation. 6 months of probing the dimensional membrane with ki, extended to its finest resolution. 6 months of mapping every quantum fluctuation in the prison that surrounded him. He had found the weakness 3 months ago. The pocket dimension was brilliant in conception, self-sustaining through connection to the dimensional membrane that separated realities. But that connection was also its flaw. Energy had to flow from somewhere to maintain the pocket's stability. That flow created a current subtle as thought, but detectable to senses refined through constant practice. Frieza opened his eyes in the absolute darkness and smiled. The first step was destabilization. He began releasing ki in precise pulses, each one calculated to resonate with the dimensional membrane's natural frequency. Not attacks, nothing crude enough to trigger the prison's defensive mechanisms. Simply vibrations at exactly the right wavelength to create constructive interference. Physics teachers across the universe used the same principle to demonstrate how bridges could collapse from wind or marching soldiers. Apply force at the natural frequency, and small inputs create catastrophic resonance. Frieza was applying that lesson to dimensional engineering. The pocket dimension began to shudder. Not physically, there was no physical structure to shake, but across probability fields and quantum states. The mathematical equations describing the prison's geometry started developing singularities points where solutions became undefined. Reed Richards would have recognized the pattern: immediately harmonic destabilization, leading to cascading structural failure. But Reed Richards was not monitoring the prison in real time. That would have required constant observation, and even beings as paranoid as Dr. Strange eventually had to sleep. The dimensional membrane stretched like rubber pulled beyond its elastic limit. Stress accumulated at the weakest point, the connection that allowed power to flow into the pocket dimension. Frieza concentrated his efforts there, each key pulse driving deeper into the developing fracture. Then, with a sensation like reality taking a sharp breath, the membrane tore. The opening was microscopic by cosmic standards, barely wide enough for light to pass through. But light in Cogby operated on different principles. Frieza compressed his form, not physically shrinking, but condensing his presence across dimensional axes until he existed as a point of pure, concentrated will. He pushed through the tear before the pocket dimension's self-repair mechanisms could seal it. Exiting was harder than entering had been. The dimensional membrane resisted, tried to close around him, attempted to force him back into the prison through geometric pressure that would have crushed anything relying on normal matter for cohesion. Frieza's black form aura blazed with output that made the membrane itself begin to burn from contact with energy it was never designed to contain. He burst through into normal space with explosive force that sent gravitational shockwaves rippling across 3 light years. The pocket dimension collapsed behind him, its geometry failing completely without a captive to anchor it. The implosion registered on sensors across half the galaxy as a dimensional anomaly that briefly outshone nearby stars. Frieza floated in vacuum, orienting himself by the constellations visible in the distance. Rift Point Sigma, where he'd been captured. The same region of space those 6 months had passed. His empire would have continued expanding under his subordinates' direction or collapsed into infighting without his presence to enforce unity. Either outcome was acceptable. Rebuilding had always been part of the plan. He checked his power output, running through diagnostic sequences that would have seemed paranoid to most beings. The imprisonment hadn't weakened him. If anything, 6 months of perfect meditation had refined his control further. His ki responded with precision he'd never quite achieved before, as if the forced stillness had allowed him to understand his own power at a deeper level. Interesting. The prison intended to contain him had instead provided training conditions impossible to replicate through normal means. He would have to thank Dr. Strange for the opportunity when they met again. Sensors were already detecting his emergence. Emergency broadcasts activated across multiple frequencies as civilizations registered that the dimensional anomaly coincided with Frieza's energy signature reappearing. Panic spread faster than light through quantum-entangled communication networks. The White Tyrant had escaped. On Earth, alarms blared through the Sanctum Sanctorum. Strange jerked awake from meditation, his astral form snapping back into his physical body with enough force to make him gasp. The scrying mirror showed empty space where Frieza should have been imprisoned. The pocket dimension collapsed into geometric impossibility. "No," Strange whispered, already moving toward his communication array. "Wong, initiate emergency protocols. Contact the Avengers, the Fantastic Four. Anyone within striking distance of Sector 779. He's out." Wong's expression showed he understood the implications immediately. How the dimensional mathematics were absolute. There was no escape vector that didn't require power output beyond. He found one anyway. Strange's hands shook as he input coordinates and spell formulas simultaneously. Or created one through methods we didn't account for. Either way, we have minutes before he reaches populated systems. But Strange's warning came too late. Frieza had no intention of attacking immediately. Instead, he set course for his former territory, curious to see what remained of the empire he'd built. Revenge could wait. Understanding the current strategic situation took priority. He found his empire had survived his absence, though barely. Infighting among his commanders had fragmented the original 7 systems into competing territories, each led by former subordinates claiming legitimate succession. His forces had lost 3 systems to reconquest by the Shi'ar and Kree, who had grown bold during his imprisonment. Frieza observed the chaos with something between amusement and disappointment. 6 months, and they'd nearly destroyed what he'd built. Typical of lesser beings, give them opportunity, and they squandered it on internal conflict rather than expansion. He chose the largest remaining faction, one led by a Kree commander who had demonstrated competence before the imprisonment. His arrival in that system was announced through simple demonstration. He destroyed an asteroid belt that had been converted into defensive fortifications, reducing millions of tons of armed platforms to dust in under 30 seconds. The message was clear. The rightful ruler had returned. Order would be restored. The commander, demonstrating the survival instinct that had kept him alive this long, surrendered his fleet immediately and pledged renewed loyalty. Others followed within hours as word spread. Within a day, Frieza had reclaimed 4 of the 7 original systems and was moving to retake the others. The universe watched with mounting horror as the White Tyrant not only returned from impossible imprisonment, but resumed conquest as if 6 months of absence had been merely a brief intermission. Whatever celebration had occurred when he was sealed evaporated into renewed fear and desperate strategizing. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, Strange stood before his assembled allies, what remained of them, after the Varon 9 battle, and delivered news no one wanted to hear. The pocket dimension failed. Frieza escaped through dimensional mechanics I'm still analyzing. He's already reclaimed most of his territory and appears to be consolidating for renewed expansion. He paused, expression grim, and I suspect the imprisonment only made him more dangerous. 6 months of meditation would have refined his already formidable control. "Then we seal him again," Thor suggested, though his voice carried none of its usual confidence. "Use the same method." "He'll expect that now," Reed interrupted. "Whatever technique he used to escape, he can replicate. The pocket dimension approach is exhausted." He looked around the room at faces that showed varying degrees of exhaustion and despair. "We need a fundamentally different strategy. Or we accept that containment isn't possible," Carol said quietly, "and focus on mitigation. Establish boundaries, negotiate territories, find a way to coexist with a threat we can't eliminate." The suggestion hung in the air like a surrender flag. No one wanted to voice agreement, but neither could anyone propose a better alternative. Frieza, unaware of and unconcerned with their deliberations, stood aboard his reclaimed flagship and gazed at holographic displays showing his reconstituted empire. Smaller than before, certainly. But that was temporary. The infrastructure remained. The reputation had only grown through his escape. And he had learned patience during his imprisonment, learned that waiting for the perfect moment often yielded better results than immediate action. The cosmic entities that had feared him enough to coordinate his sealing would be watching now, waiting to see what he did next. Good. Let them watch. Let them see him rebuild, methodically expanding only when strategically optimal, demonstrating that he was not mere brute force, but intelligence backing absolute power. The White Tyrant had returned, and this time he would not be caught unprepared. This universe would learn the same lesson Universe 7 had learned millennia ago, that some forces of nature were not defeated, merely endured until they moved on to other concerns. And Frieza had no intention of moving on. Not until every system worth claiming bore his mark. 3 weeks after his escape, Frieza stood at the observation deck of his flagship and watched the conquest of the 15th star system under his renewed reign. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 8 minutes. His forces had improved during his absence, desperation sharpening their tactics into genuine competence. They no longer required his personal intervention for routine subjugation. Good. Efficiency was the mark of proper empire building. A Shi'ar commander approached with appropriate deference, holding a data tablet, displaying intelligence reports. "Lord Frieza, long-range sensors have detected unusual activity near the galactic core. Multiple cosmic entities converging on a single location. Preliminary analysis suggests they may be coordinating a response to your return." Frieza took the tablet and studied the data with interest that transcended mere curiosity. The entities gathering included several whose names appeared in his intelligence databases, with classifications like abstract and fundamental. Death, infinity, several celestials. Even fragmentary reports of something called the Living Tribunal observing from higher dimensions. "They're planning another attempt at containment," he said, returning the tablet. "How predictable. Continue expansion along the planned vectors. If cosmic entities wish to discuss terms, they know where to find me." But the entities were not coming to discuss terms. In a realm that existed perpendicular to normal space beings, who rarely cooperated even during universal extinction events, had reached consensus. The entity calling itself Frieza represented an unacceptable variable. Not evil in any cosmic sense, the abstracts did not judge morality. Simply disruptive beyond parameters that allowed universal function to continue unimpeded. Eternity still weakened from Secret War's reconstruction, nevertheless committed fragments of power to what would come next. The living tribunal, who typically observed rather than intervened, had judged that this situation merited active response. Even Death, who rarely involved herself in matters of the living, recognized that Frieza's presence was creating ripples that might eventually require her direct attention. The plan they formulated was not imprisonment this time. It was isolation. 2 months after reclaiming his empire, Frieza felt reality shift around him. Not attack, not manipulation, but fundamental alteration of his relationship to the universe itself. His ki, which had always flowed freely through local space, suddenly encountered resistance, like trying to breathe through water. The dimensional membrane that allowed him to exist in this reality was being forcibly rewritten. He pushed back immediately, black form aura blazing as power contested with cosmic authority. For 17 seconds, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath, while tyrant and cosmic order struggled for dominance. Mountains on nearby planets cracked from the pressure. Stars within 50 light-years flickered as energy flows were disrupted. Then Strange's voice echoed across dimensional barriers, amplified by borrowed power from the abstracts. Frieza, this is not imprisonment. This is exile. The dimensional rift that brought you here is being permanently sealed. You can remain in our universe and face the combined might of every cosmic entity simultaneously, or you can choose to leave and seek conquest elsewhere in the infinite multiverse. Frieza snarled but recognized the trap's elegance. They had learned from the pocket dimension's failure. This time they offered choice: stay and fight what amounted to universal immune response, or leave with empire intact, but access to this reality severed forever. Fighting would be glorious, but ultimately pointless. Even his power had limits, and those limits would be reached long before he eliminated every cosmic abstract. Strategic withdrawal was not surrender. It was survival to fight more favorable battles. Clever, he transmitted back, voice carrying across the dimensional static. You've learned to offer me something I might actually accept. Very well, sorcerer. I will leave your universe to its mediocrity. But understand this, I came here by accident. The next entity that finds its way through dimensional barriers might not be so easily persuaded to depart. He turned to his assembled forces, those who had remained loyal through imprisonment and reconquest. Set course for the dimensional coordinates where I originally entered this reality. We're leaving, but not empty-handed. Strip every system of portable resources. If this universe wants us gone, we'll take payment for our time. The next week was organized plunder on a scale that would be remembered in galactic histories for millennia. Frieza's forces, given license to loot without restraint, extracted tribute from every world they'd conquered. Technology resources, even volunteers who preferred service under a known tyrant to uncertain futures, under-returned local authorities. When the evacuation was complete, Frieza's fleet numbered over 200 ships laden with enough material to seed a new empire in whatever reality they reached next. He stood aboard the flagship's bridge as his scientists worked to reopen the dimensional rift using data collected during his arrival. The rift materialized ahead of them, a tear in space that led to somewhere else in the infinite multiverse. Frieza's key senses probed through it and detected nothing familiar. Not Universe 7, not this Marvel reality, but a third option entirely. Good enough. All ships prepare for dimensional transit. He paused, then added with dark amusement. And someone make note of the dimensional coordinates for this universe. I may wish to return someday when I have grown bored with easier conquests. The fleet began moving toward the rift in orderly procession. As Frieza's flagship approached the threshold, Strange's voice came through one final time. You could have been stopped. If the abstracts had acted sooner, if we'd coordinated from the beginning. But you didn't, Frieza interrupted. And now I leave with more than I arrived with, having carved my name across your cosmic history. Tell your entities and heroes that I'll remember this universe fondly. It taught me patience and showed me that even realities with gods can be conquered by those willing to commit fully to the effort. His ship crossed the threshold, followed by the rest of his fleet. The dimensional rift began collapsing behind them, the Marvel Universe's cosmic entities ensuring it sealed permanently this time. No return path would remain. No second invasion would be possible. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, Strange watched through his scrying mirror as the last of Frieza's vessels disappeared and the rift sealed with finality that even his mystical senses confirmed. Wong entered quietly and stood beside him. Is it truly over? Wong asked. Strange continued staring at the mirror, which now showed only empty space where a tyrant had briefly rewritten cosmic assumptions about power and conquest. He's gone from our universe, yes. But over. He shook his head slowly. Somewhere in the infinite multiverse, an empire is about to experience what we just survived. And they'll be even less prepared than we were. Should we warn them? Find a way to send message across dimensional barriers? How? Strange's laugh was bitter. We barely understand how he traveled between realities in the first place. And what would we say beware a white and purple entity with power beyond your reality's parameters? They'd think it myth until the planet started dying. He turned away from the mirror finally. No. We survived. We learned. We adapted. That's the best we could manage against something that exists outside our universe's power hierarchies. Other realities will have to learn the same lessons we did. Across the galaxy, civilizations began the slow process of recovery. Worlds rebuilt. Empires reclaimed stolen territory. Heroes returned to their normal duties of facing normal threats. The White Nova campaign became legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers that lurked in the multiverse's infinite possibilities. But in secret vaults and classified databases, records remained. Energy signature analyses, tactical reports, everything learned about Ki and how it operated outside conventional cosmic power frameworks. Just in case. Because everyone who had faced Frieza understood one fundamental truth. Beings with that much power rarely stayed gone forever. Somewhere in some reality, the White Tyrant was building a new empire and learning from his first multiversal conquest. And if he ever found his way back to Universe 616, they would need every scrap of knowledge gathered during his first visit just to survive his second. The dimensional rift was sealed. The threat was contained. But contained was not eliminated. And the universe would watch its dimensional barriers with paranoid attention for centuries to come, remembering the 3 months when a tyrant from beyond their reality had nearly succeeded in claiming it entirely. Frieza, traveling through the space between realities, smiled at his reflection in the viewport. Behind him, an empire in transit. Ahead, infinite possibilities. The multiverse was vast, and he had learned patience. Conquest would continue, just elsewhere, for now.